Good morning and welcome to 2025 and this webinar, which is the first webinar of the year for us here at Bigeye. So thank you for joining us. Some quick introductions. I'm Eleanor Treharne-Jones and I'm the CEO here at Bigeye and delighted to be doing this webinar today together with Kirwan. Kyle, do introduce yourself.
Hey there, I'm Kyle Kirwan. I'm the co-founder of Bigeye and the Chief Product Officer, a change that we announced at the beginning of the year, I think. Eleanor, glad to be on another webinar with you.
Fantastic, thank you. So as the start of the year, it's all a question of both looking back and looking forward. So as we do that within the business, also doing it within the data observability space. So in this webinar, we're going to reflect back on the predictions that we as a team made a year ago, see how accurate they were. Depending on that, you can consider whether you want to carry on and stick with the webinar and listen to what we think is going to be our predictions for what's going to happen in this industry in the year ahead. So with that, let's start off by revealing what we predicted would be some of the top things to take place in the industry in 2024. So Kyle, I think you are the behind number of these. So give us your quick kind of review and rating. How well did we do?
I think we were close to the mark on most of these. So RAG-based LLMs, I think when we gave the predictions last time, I had gone to a talk that Ali from Databricks had given the prior October, and I think he had said on stage that something like 55% of AI workloads on Databricks across their customer base were RAGs at the time, and it made a lot of sense that like it's already at that number, and I fully expected that it would continue to climb. Now, obviously, I don't have access to their internal numbers, so I don't know 100% if this is true or not, at least on the Databricks platform. But I've definitely continued to hear plenty of talk about RAGs, a little bit less about fine-tuning. Hard to say if we got this exactly right or not. I would guess it's at least directionally correct, but I think one of the topics we'll talk about a little bit later is like just what is the speed of AI adoption in the enterprise in general. So my guess is that the ratio probably says that we were pointed in the right direction. On verticalization, I think we got this one slam dunk. I mean, we saw for the last couple of years, Snowflake and Databricks both announcing features that continue to go vertical within their platforms, both down below on like some of the iceberg stuff that happened, 6 months ago, as well as continued investment up in like the data governance layer, data observability layer. So at least from like the giant players in the space, I'd say that we have continued to see that one. So I'd give us a solid yes score on number 2. Number 3, I am going to renew this one for this year. I think a lot of people rightfully expected consolidation to happen. A little bit did. So we saw Cloudera bought Octopi. That was kind of an answer, it looked like, to IBM's Manta acquisition the prior year. And I think I just expected there to be a little bit more M&A activity, but it does seem like that is the waters are warm for that right now, from what I'm hearing. So I would expect this to continue. This one, I think that we were maybe a little bit early on it.
Yeah, so all three definitely were kind of on the money, but both with RAG-based LLMs and the consolidation, perhaps not at the pace that we anticipated as we entered into 2024.
I'm an optimist.
Okay, well, with our crystal ball again, taking a look at what we think the trends, and more narrowly focused on data observability, what those trends are likely to be for the year ahead. So kicking that off on the next slide, one of the big things we've seen is, the challenge of, how do you match a kind of true enterprise, architecture where, you've got the reality of kind of, the rapid migration onto platforms like Snowflake and Databricks, but equally a ton of legacy tools out there that aren't going anywhere anytime soon. So how do you see this moving in the year ahead?
I would guess, like looking at observability, I'm expecting to see a good bit happening here, but kind of quietly. I think for a lot of folks, they want to talk about new shiny stuff. So saying that like, hey, we support, your Spark cluster or that kind of thing is maybe, the sheen has worn off from that kind of thing. So I don't know that you'll like hear about it very loudly, but I would guess that you'll see an increased amount of connectivity and support for legacy systems. I think the reality is that as much as the enterprise is moving forward and modernizing and replacing, older components in their data platform, some of this stuff just takes a really long time. And so I think it would be shocking if you don't see more observability companies trying to go beyond just the modern data stack and being actually able to support the legacy systems that are either going to stick around for a while, or at a minimum, they're part of a transition and they want to help accelerate that sort of transformation onto whatever the new platform is. That's a position that like we've taken in the market for a long time, obviously. But I think that the reality is, if you want to go do business with the enterprise, you have to be able to work with both the new stuff and the stuff that's, you know, been there for a while. So I would be surprised if we don't see this support increase in the space.
And your thoughts on the ongoing kind of, well, I was just going to pick up on the Snowflake and Databricks, you know, convergence that's here on the slide. What was behind that thought?
Well, so way back in the day, Snowflake and Databricks were like wildly different platforms from the outside. And it seems like over time they are getting closer and closer looking to one another. You know, last year again with this stuff around external data stored in Iceberg support, I think it was Snowflake's catalog that allows them now to interface with you know, external storage like that. They're just looking a little bit more similar over time. Databricks has become a lot more turnkey to operate. Snowflake has increased support for stuff that isn't just traditional structured data in the warehouse. And they're competing increasingly for the same customer base. We've talked to a lot of customers who have both. So they might still serve different functions. They have different strengths. Obviously, Databricks has really hung its hat hard on AI in their platform. Snowflake has Cortex. So there's just a lot of like trading off and rivalry between the two. And it just seems like they're looking slightly closer every passing year to one another. I don't want to say they're interchangeable. Everybody has preferences and places where they fit, but they definitely look a lot closer than they did, you know, 10 years ago, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure there'll be a whole separate webinar on what changes we expect and see from those two, at least over the year ahead.
Sure.
But from what we've seen and heard a lot from the likes of Gartner and other analysts, data observability as a single pane of glass isn't just what you can connect to, but we're also seeing an expect an expansion in the types of, you know, what's in scope for observability moving forward.
Yeah, I think I mean, those are the two axes, right? One is like, how much stuff can you talk to? And then the other axis is what can you ascertain about it? And when I say stuff, I mean like the tech stack, the enterprise. So I think, you know, we talked about on the prior slide, like increased support for legacy systems, that's going broader and becoming more of a single pane of glass, in that you can show someone what's going on with their on-prem Informatica Power Center. You can also show them what's going on with their DBT cloud jobs that are running on top of Snowflake. And those will coexist within the same enterprise. So that's like that one axis, which is like how much of the stack can you address? And then this is the other axis, which is within all of that you're connected to, what type of information can you pull out of it? So privacy, security, being able to identify sensitive data, classify it correctly. You know, this is a social security number, this is a last name, access patterns around that. I think Gartner, talked about this last year, that this is an area that may or may not become part of their data observability definition in the future. I think it should be. I think it makes a lot of sense. Users and infrastructure, again, no question for me here. You want to understand who's in the platform, who's using it, what kind of queries are they running, what infrastructure is it running it on, are those jobs working, how long do they take, how expensive are they to operate, that kind of thing. One that's not on here is FinOps and sort of cost and budget. I've always been really on the fence about that one. I can see why you might want it to be part of a data observability platform. On the other hand, there's a lot of really great best of breed tools out there for doing that are already very mature, and they go broader than just your data stack. They can cover things like GCS, EC2. That one, I don't know that I'm totally sold on, but these three for sure, I can see expanding the definition of data observability to cover them.
And when we talk about infrastructure, you and I have talked about this, does that mean this is encroaching into the space of kind of, you know, application observability, kind of, you know, where Datadog and others kind of sit? Or I think you mean something different here.
Well, yes and no. I mean, we have seen that, you know, Datadog has started to make some investments in this direction, if you pay attention to like their job postings and that kind of thing. So I'd be shocked if, you know, Dynatrace and some of the other players in the sort of traditional observability realm aren't also eyeballing the space. It's obviously a very critical and important problem. So I would expect that you'll start to see some upward pressure in the category from traditional observability vendors. But at the end of the day, monitoring infrastructure is fundamentally quite different from monitoring pipeline flow. Data content, especially, it's a very different beast than monitoring, you know, how many messages are in a queue or how much CPU and memory are you using. So I think there will be a lot of learning and challenges that those companies have to get through in order to actually make an investment into the data content, the data quality, the usage, users and usage, privacy and security elements of observability. So they have a long road ahead. On the other side, if you were to look at a data observability vendor that wanted to move into monitoring infrastructure, it's a little bit more of a well-trodden path. It's pretty clear what to do and how to support it. So I think it's easier to invest in one direction than the other.
And there's the question here, can we truly unify these? But also, how important is this as you prioritize the functionality within data observability? Is completeness the most important goal, or how would you prioritize that?
Personally, I think that completeness is important, but you earn the right to go after completeness after you've demonstrated capability within a narrower scope. So for example, if let's say you have a platform, you can detect data quality issues, unknown unknowns, you're able to find unknown unknowns in a data pipeline, cool. Can you facilitate the incident management around that afterwards? If you haven't figured out how to get a customer able to identify problems in the pipeline, identify problems in the data content, and help them get through that resolution process, and theoretically put preventative steps in place and say, we can prevent this problem from occurring again in the future, I don't know that you've really earned the right to move on to the other areas, because otherwise what you really are is you built a very good smoke alarm for a bunch of stuff, but you haven't handed them a fire extinguisher. I think you got to build a fire extinguisher first, and then you can work on having more types of smoke alarms, because you can bring that fire extinguisher to bear against those different types of problems. But I think going to an enterprise and saying, I can tell you about 7 different categories of things that are going wrong in your data environment, but I can't help you fix any of them, I don't know if that's the most compelling story in my mind.
I agree. I think it's about focus and value. And so, being able to help, triage that is more important than perhaps heading into the depths of the, the recesses of, the environment for, as you say, searching for more and more potential problems. Okay, we cannot have this conversation and not talk about AI, obviously. I don't think, is anyone going to mention AI in 2025? I'm not sure. Joking aside, I think some of the conversations that we've been having for a long while is data observability here in order to enable, AI to, the success of AI by, addressing the fundamental problem of the quality of data that's feeding into various models? Or is AI actually, the solution is bringing AI into data observability platforms, suddenly realizing the potential that we've been, talking about for so long? So how do you see the AI kind of, pivot taking place this year?
Trick question, right? I think if you're actually pursuing Gen AI, first, I think the question is this: where are you in the maturity curve on Gen AI? Because I think last year, a ton of C-suites dumped a bunch of budget and high urgency initiatives on Tiger teams to go out and just understand as fast as possible, like, what is the art of the possible around Gen AI, what could we use it for, et cetera. None of those are production use cases. So where observability really comes in is once you have a production use case and you can't tolerate downtime on that production use case, that's when observability becomes important. I don't know how many enterprises are quite there yet. Once they do get there, then I think, yes, observability for Gen AI applications is going to be critical for the same reason that it's critical with traditional analytics. If you have a marketing team and they're directing a $20 million marketing budget for the year, and your analytics that they're using to do that are wrong, then you're not optimizing the spend on that budget. So I think you have the same risk around Gen AI applications. The difference is the marketing teams are directing $20 million to spend right now, and there are problems with the actual analytics they're using to do that. With Gen AI, I think in many cases we haven't exited the prototyping stage just yet. So I don't think it makes sense to prioritize observability there today. I think it might later this year, it might next year. The flip side, I think, is way more short-term practical, which is what can Gen AI do inside of observability tools or enterprise tools in general. And as you know from our internal experiments and prototypes, it's really good at one particular type of task, demonstrated success, which is synthesizing and boiling down a bunch of existing data points and information into something that a human being can comprehend. The actual generative part, which I find this kind of ironic, the generative part is a little bit harder to get right. So if you say, for example, I want you to create a data quality rule for me, or I want you to add monitoring to my system, you get a lot more variance in the outputs. You might create something that you didn't actually want. You have a higher risk of hallucination. The sort of going the other direction and summarizing signal and boiling it down, that seems to be much more reliable. And a human being's never going to interpret 150,000 data points, by themselves, but a model can. So I think there's a ton of space, especially in observability, where we deal with really, really high cardinality telemetry coming from customer systems to apply Gen AI in really impactful ways. And we can do that like tomorrow. That's ready to go like now. So if I had to look at observability for Gen AI or AI for observability, I would put my chips on value coming from the latter in a shorter time frame. The other one will come, but I think we have some more time on that.
Yeah, I think last year was the year of, enterprises becoming, as you said, AI ready. And at the same time, it was the year of data observability platforms and other enterprise solutions, talking about AI, and, everyone was launching something. But it feels like this is the year where both on the enterprise side, we're going to start to see, proven production ready solutions, and on the, kind of solution side, starting to see some really exciting, value coming from these opportunities moving forward.
Yeah, last year it was just announce anything you possibly can around Gen AI, and you can't be late to the party kind of thing. And now, yeah, this year we'll see where the actual value comes from in the platform. Totally agree.
Okay, so as we talk about some of the exciting potential that we're seeing for what AI can bring, as we move to the next question, is it still really an option for companies to, build these solutions in-house? For a long time, particularly at the larger enterprise with, significant kind of internal team, we heard it was easier for people to kind of build something that was custom to their own environment. But as we start to see the maturity of the category and the solutions that are available, do you still feel that's a viable option for some companies?
It depends. In some cases, yes. And I think like the question behind the question is like, build how much? And if all you need is like a quick and dirty framework, there's a bunch of open source stuff out there. You can go grab it, put it on top of dbt, customize it a little bit. Yeah, probably fine for like a narrow use case or that kind of thing, or if it doesn't need to last that long, or you don't need as much coverage or that kind of thing. I do think there are viable cases where, especially with the pricing that comes with a fully mature data observability solution, especially for smaller companies, building might make sense in some cases. I think what's changed, though, is the gap between what someone's going to build and what's commercially available is much wider than it was, let's say, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So 3 years ago, the difference between a data observability platform that you could go buy off the shelf and what your team of really crack engineers could do if you gave them a quarter to just, hack on something really hard, probably the commercial solution was a little bit more feature rich and nicer looking and that kind of thing. But like the gap is much wider now than it was before. And that's the nature of having an ecosystem of vendors, right? We are competing with everybody else in the category. We're taking feedback and advice from our customers. We're continuing to invest fully. All of our engineering effort goes into developing this platform and making it as good as possible, as opposed to it being a project in addition to all the other competing priorities within an enterprise. I think if you want like an easy example to think about for this, like, would anybody go and build Datadog internally? Probably not, right? I mean, it just wouldn't make sense. Like, there's such a complete solution out there. They've already thought of so many of the problems. They've dealt with the scaling challenges. They've done a ton of homework on the UI and the UX and how does it work. And it would be very hard to make the case that it is economically viable to build something instead. And we are much earlier as a market in terms of maturity of the products than the traditional observability space. But we are 5 years in now. And so there is a pretty demonstrable gap between what's commercially available and what you'd be able to build. I think that's going to continue widening over time.
Yeah. And then the other perennial question is obviously, data quality has been here as a category for a very long time, and data observability kind of came in with a lot of, promise and noise. Are we starting to see the convergence of these two categories? I think we're starting to see a lot of repositioning. There's a lot from a marketing perspective that we've seen data quality companies offering data observability features, data observability companies covering that data quality space. But where do you see the kind of tooling beneath that?
I think I think that, so first off, like traditional data quality, rule-based, pass-fail conditions, that's not going away. I don't think there's never going to be a place in an enterprise where there is not a spot for pass-fail conditions or for data cleansing rules, et cetera. Those are always going to be around, I think. The difference is that used to be the only tool you really had. You would profile and then you would generate a bunch of rules. Some of them would do cleansing for you. You'd run them. We've given talks with customers before. We did one at Snowflake last year. The customer we gave a talk with, they have 20,000 legacy rules. That's a lot. That's a lot of pass-fail rules to manage. They don't update themselves. They can't adapt to changes in business conditions. They don't use anomaly detection models, for example. A lot of those rules can be replaced with dynamic monitoring that adapts to what's going on in the pipeline and adapts to what's going on in the business. But there are rules that are always going to make sense. So for example, you have a primary key. You want to make sure it's never null, it's always unique. You just can have a rule for that. That's not a problem. And you can just stamp those rules out for every primary key that you've got in your environment. No big deal. So I think that data quality rules are going to continue to exist. It's just that they won't be 90 to 100% of the approach anymore. They'll come down to like 10 or 15%. And the rest of it will be dynamic monitoring. And then in terms of the market, for sure, we've seen like basically every traditional data quality vendor has slapped data observability somewhere on their website or said, yeah, we do that too. And then the question is like, how true is that? I think if you go actually like do a demo or do a POC or try out, those features, you'll see pretty quickly that it's primarily a way to get the marketing language on there, and that makes sense. I'm sure that they will invest in this direction over time. So just like we were talking about Snowflake and Databricks converging, I think eventually you'll see practically every traditional data quality vendor moving in the direction of data observability. And I think at this point already, practically every data observability vendor has some sort of a DQ rule function. We certainly do. I'm pretty sure all of our competitors do as well by this point. Maybe it's not quite as whiz-bang as some of the legacy ones that have been around, but profiling, DQ rules, stuff like that, pretty common even within the observability category already. So I think it's been easier for the observability companies to replicate traditional data quality than the other direction, just because of the architecturally the way it works.
Yeah, it's not an either or. It never has been, but it's a shift in the prioritization. I think what we started to see now is also the, less of that kind of sunk cost. The idea that continuing to maintain a massive, number of data quality rules, despite the investment that you've made, ultimately with the ease of migration now to a, ongoing data reliability solution, that's no longer a barrier for a lot of companies.
No, it's so easy. Like if you look at a rule and the rule is no nulls, I mean, it's super easy to create a monitor in an observability platform from that rule, except after that, as soon as it becomes a monitor, it can be a flat threshold of 0%, or you can just say, I'd like this to be an anomaly detection model instead. Boom. It's now a dynamically alerting thing instead of a fixed rule. But those imports are not that hard to do. And so even when you have 20,000 rules, maybe it takes a little bit of manual labor, to get them in there the first time, but the sunk cost is not a real sunk cost because you can always just roll it over into your observability tool.
Okay, and then conscious of time, now's the moment for some bold predictions for 2025. So this is what we aligned on. Talk me through the kind of top three here.
So these are all AI related, big surprise. The first is commoditization, and then this kind of drives the third one as well, which is something that we saw with microprocessors over the last, 50 or so years, is in the beginning, CPUs were super, super advanced things, and you would put them in things like rockets. And now I'm pretty sure that there's a microchip in like my fan in my living room. Like they're just in everything. Every household object now has some sort of a CPU in it, even if it's a simplistic one. And that's because of commoditization pressure. And once we get good at something, we figure out how to make it smaller and faster and cheaper. And we just, hammer on that over and over again. And once that price barrier comes down, then we start to just use it everywhere. I think Gen AI is in the rocket phase at the moment, where it's a pretty big, complicated thing. It's new to a lot of people. We don't totally understand where to use it yet. But I'm guessing that at the rate it's going over the course of 2025, we might not get to the, I have a microchip in my, desk fan level when it comes to Gen AI. But as we were saying earlier, you can just take Gen AI models and drop them into enterprise tools in a lot of very simple places. And they are valuable, not game changing, but valuable. I think we'll find more and more of those opportunities. And as models get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to make calls to, API calls to, we'll find more and more places in which it's like, well, why don't we just stick a model here? Whereas today you have to use heuristics or business logic for things.
I think we're going to have a whole new market in terms of FinOps and cost optimization and management of these models as well, because that, I think, at the moment, everyone is excited by the innovation, just as, when we started to see the shift to kind of Snowflake and Databricks. But I think we'll see an equal market arise in the optimization of that from a finance perspective.
I was just having a conversation with an engineer on our team earlier about, should we use this model? Should we use that model? This one's a little more expensive, but it does these things. That one's a little cheaper and a little faster. And it really gets down into optimization, like what task are you trying to solve and what price do you want to pay for it? So right now, those optimizations, I think on a lot of teams, ours included, are kind of judgment calls, as opposed to, like you said, being things that can be optimized with tools. So yeah, I'd love to see that in the future.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're on the dot of the 30 minutes. I really appreciate the time. And I look forward to, in a year's time, seeing how well we did and reviewing our 2025 predictions. So here's to a great year.
Let's see how it goes. 2025 is going to be fun.
Thank you.